So thank you everyone for joining us today. I will just start off by reading the land acknowledgement. I am an African Caribbean woman that goes by the pronouns of she and her. I am gratefully and respectfully acknowledge that Toronto is in the dish of one spoon territory. I acknowledge that I live and benefit from working within the dish with one spoon territory. The Toronto Purchase and the Williams Treaty. This treaty is home to the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and to any subsequent nation that are caretakers of this territory that have not been mentioned, recorded, or unrecorded. I recognize that Black people shared this land since 1608, first arriving to serve as an interpreter to the Mi'kmaq language. Since the 16th century, Black people have a long-standing relationship with the territories upon which Ryerson University campuses are situated that preceded the establishment of Ryerson University. I do not condone the ongoing colonialization that takes place on Turtle Island, which continues to undermine the vital role and sovereignty of Indigenous people in our world. I have the honor of having a conversation with Kika Roach, and I will just read her bio. So Kiki Roach is the Unifor Chair in Social Justice and Democracy at Ryerson University, where she teaches courses in human rights in at the School of Social Work and in social movements and politics in the politics department. Before coming to Ryerson, Kike worked as a civil rights lawyer representing organizations like the Black Action Defense Committee and the Community Alliance for Social Justice. She has appeared frequently in the media and was a regular commentator on current and legal affairs on CTV News and CBC News World. She is co-author of the book Politically Speaking on Feminism and Canadian Politics. Her work is published in the New Anthropology, We Resist, Defending the Common Good in Hostile Times. Thank you, Kike, and welcome to the conversation. CESAR.
Thank you for inviting me, Carol, and thanks to everybody at CESAR. During my time at Ryerson, I came here in 2017, and I have to say that it's been wonderful working with the Continuing Education Students Association ever since then. It's been a great partnership. We've managed to do a lot of good events together. So I'm really pleased to be here and yeah, looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you. I will just start with the first question, and it's just and then we could just get into it. So you lecture here at Ryerson. So can you tell me about what you're teaching and your courses? And
yeah, I have to say that my position is a cross appointment between the Faculty of Arts and the Faculty of Community Services. So I teach both in the politics department and in the School of Social Work. And during the winter is when I teach on the politics side, and that's the work that I've been doing for the last several months. And I have to say that despite all the bad news that we've been seeing, the upset, the crisis really that the province is in and our whole country is in, the world is in, one of the bright lights for me has been every week meeting with students and talking about politics, talking about social movements, talking about how people confronted a lot of oppression, discrimination, barriers, very deep structural inequality. and how they were able to mobilize and strategize to overcome some of these challenges and really shape the kind of freedoms that many of us enjoy. We know we're still on a long road towards freedom and true equality for everyone. But that's the kind of stuff that we talk about in social movements and politics. And I have been involved in, over the course of, before I became a civil rights lawyer, actually, because I came from a very political family. So I remember, even from being a little girl, I was out in the streets protesting. My parents would drag me to all kinds of political meetings and stuff like that. So it was very much in my upbringing and awareness that people needed to be involved in what I didn't understand was politics at the time. I thought it was people coming together to defend our lives, because one of the things that really marked me and shaped my whole life was the killing of a man named Albert Johnson. He was somebody who was shot to death by a police officer, Toronto police officer, in his own home in downtown Toronto. And he was killed in front of his little daughter. So she actually witnessed her father being killed by this officer. And my parents knew this family. And my dad took me to the home of the Johnson family when Mrs. Johnson called him in distress, because she was also in the home at the time. And so that really marked me. The first time I ever went to a funeral home was to be present at the funeral proceedings for Mr. Johnson. So then that led me into a whole thing where, it just kind of seared itself into me as a young child that I have to do something to fight back against this. So it was lodged in my consciousness then. Of course, as a little girl, I didn't realize that I one day would be in a courtroom, like cross-examining police officers who'd killed people and things like that. But it was a natural kind of trajectory from that kind of sort of traumatic event. And so I've stepped away from practicing law, but I get to continue talking about just these kinds of issues in the classroom. And boy, is it ever a time to be speaking about this as we witness a global movement, right, for Black lives unfolding, and the eyes of the world on trials like the George Floyd trial and so on. One of the things that I'm fortunate to be able to do is to be able to put a Canadian context on all of this. And people do, and I find my students do, in fact, they know the names, like the whole world knows the name George Floyd, right? But one of the things that, it still takes me aback is when dialoguing with my students, they say, yeah, we know that name. But when I tell them the names, Albert Johnson, Kenneth Allen, DeAndre Campbell, Andrew Loku, Jermaine Carby, they don't know these names. They do not know these names at all. So I feel that it's one of my missions with this course, especially social movements and politics, to kind of unmask and strip away some of the mythology about what this nation is all about, what happens in Canada, how people assert their rights, how people's rights are violated, because this is what's happening all around us. And I think what I encounter year after year is students who are shocked to find out some of these hidden truths. And so I think it's both disturbing in a way, but it's also, I feel proud that by the end of the course, I get reflections back from students who are saying, wow, I didn't know this. I didn't know that women had to fight for reproductive rights. They thought it was just part of healthcare. people saying to me who are third and fourth year students, right? And I have students from across the university who are studying all kinds of different things because my course is an open elective. But I have third and fourth year students saying to me, wow, I didn't know slavery existed in Canada. Wow, I did not know that we had segregation in Canada. Wow, I did not know that as a Black person, the majority of people in the Black community could not get any other kind of job other than as a domestic worker or a sleeping car porter on the trains, right? They're saying things to me like, wow, they didn't understand the history of immigration even in Canada. They didn't realize that our government had formal policies to keep out people from basically the majority of the world, right? And so when they come to find out that Black people have played a central role in this, Asian people have played a central role, women have played a central role in shaping the kinds of freedoms that they just take for granted, it really is an eye opener to them. But what becomes even more of an eye opener is when I bring in guest speakers. So I invite, and this year I did it even more than I normally do. I always have some guest speakers, but this year I made a more emphasis on bringing in more different voices because I thought that we should take advantage of the fact that we don't see each other, we're not socializing as much, to have conversations, right, with a wide variety of people. And I found that my students really enjoyed that. They liked the conversational style, and they found that they were learning just as much, if not more sometimes, than in their standard, pre-recorded lectures with one professor just, drawing on their expertise and conveying a message to them. So what became even more eye-opening to them is that a lot of these realities are not just historical, right? But they're very much in the present day. So an example of that is we were very fortunate to hear from Elder Wanda Whitebird, who's been a long-term activist on so many different issues, but she's most noted for her work around HIV/AIDS, around supporting prisoners, and as well as supporting families of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And Elder Whitebird will be familiar to a lot of people as she's opened many proceedings and events, including at Ryerson, but she is a constant figure at the strawberry ceremony every single year on February 14th in front of police headquarters on Forty College, right? And she was able to come to the class and explain to the students the background about what is the significance of the strawberry ceremony? Why do they gather there every year? And she was able to bring insights into the classroom that I could never do, even if I, include certain kinds of readings, or we might watch certain sort of videos or films or whatever. There's information that sometimes you can only get from speaking to people who are directly involved and at the center of the movement, right? And so Wanda Whitebird is exactly that kind of leader, right? Who was able to give us deeper insights around the struggle for against violence against Indigenous women. And she was able to show us, for example, that she gets calls every single week from families. She could tell us in detail how police failed to respond, how families had to maneuver themselves and the community had to come around and support people, and how sometimes individuals had to take up certain tasks, such as investigating their own family member's disappearance, because the police simply wouldn't do it. And the stories that she told us are stories that we don't hear. They're stories that are not taught to us in our curriculum, but they're also stories that don't even appear on the mainstream news. And so what that does for students is it makes them sit back and think, like, why am I not hearing this on the mainstream media, in fact? But then when we brought Terry Montour, who is a Mohawk woman from the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, who's also somebody in the No More Silence movement, she was able to deepen our understanding about why this phenomenon is even taking place in the first place, and take us back to a time that is before colonization, and give us a deeper understanding of Haudenosaunee culture, governance. She was able to help us think through how an attack on Indigenous women in particular was so central to the colonizing process. She explained to us the important roles that women in the Mohawk Nation played in terms of governance, in terms of selecting leaders for the different nations in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. She was able to give us insights about how it was really women who were key in deciding when a nation would choose to go to war or not, or make peace, engage in a treaty with another nation. And so then it was then that, students found that really eye-opening to begin to see the connections between things like a phenomenon that just gets, sort of quickly brushed over. And they get to see who's really involved in that. So that's just one sort of small example of some of the kinds of peeling away that we do, some of the mythology that kind of begins to fall about Canada being a peaceable, kind nation where everyone says sorry and excuse me, and we're all so polite, and we're multicultural, and everybody's just eating each other's foods and whatnot, right? So I think that's something that has been really important to me.
Thank you for that, really detailed and way of explaining things. I just tweeted out Dr. Shaman Nelson tweet when she said, over 200 years of Canadian slavery, and it's not being taught in the schools, not in high school, not in colleges, not in university. So what is happening here? And she just have an institution that she opened up for people to come in and to study and to bring and really put spotlight onto more than 200 years of slavery. And it's not being, people believe that Canada never had slaves, right? They would. Right. So thank you for that.
They hear the narrative of the Underground Railroad and how enslaved people escaped to Canada, but they don't hear about what's going on here. And I think to not know that history is a disservice to our students and to the whole Canadian populace, basically, because then we don't have a context for understanding the disparities that continue to this day, right? Like, why is it that to this day, we have racialized people who are doing certain kinds of jobs, right? It begins to make more sense, and you begin to contextualize and see the role that government has played when we start to delve into, as we do in my course, how were the Chinese workers treated when they were brought here to build the railways? How were South Asian people dealt with when they came here, or they attempted to come here and settle with their families? And what kind of opportunities were made available or not made available to them when they did come, right? So it's important, I think, to have these historical contexts, but not just to talk about discrimination and things that were done to people, but also to see that people were quite powerful, and even in small numbers, forming coalitions with other groups, such as Black workers did with Jewish labor committees and other kinds of alliances that were made over time to build a kind of strength and to be able to play a very, very significant role in creating institutions. I think people don't realize the extent to which non-white people have really shaped things like the different human rights commissions that we've had, informing the feminist movement, informing things like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, moving us all into various different professions.
Yes, absolutely.
These are major things that people are happy to find out, like, how did that happen? What was the process? What were the struggles, the challenges? How did they overcome them? And they want to know this kind of information. And the one thing that kind of scares me is that while I'm happy to be able to teach this course, my course is an elective. It's not embedded into the curriculum. So we actually talk about that in the class, right? We talk about, is education really neutral? Is there some sort of objectivity that happens into what you learn in elementary school all the way up to graduation? And as they begin to hear all of these significant people who have been part of the feminist movement, been part of queer liberation, been part of the Indigenous land defense and sovereignty struggles, been part of the disability justice movement, as they begin to hear about directly from these folks, the message becomes very clear. Whoa, there's no such notion as some sort of neutral or objective course of curricula that we study. And so that's what I'm after. I'm after people being able to emerge, asking critical questions and trying to figure out why is this and what can we do about it? I was really pleased that in some of my other work, I've been able to work with students such as I was mentioning before, CESAR, to put on Social Justice Week and to bring people like Dr. Charmaine Nelson, who's now founded that Institute for the Study of Canadian Slavery that you just spoke about, right? And to speak to a broader audience. There was so much enthusiasm for that speech. People have been asking, how can we learn more, right? And so, there's some really fundamental conversations that I think we're not having enough of. It's fine to put out statements saying we're against racism, whatever, but I feel that there's now more of an urgency and an imperative for every single discipline to look at itself, to examine itself, and to ask itself, what exactly are we teaching? Who is telling the stories? What are we missing? Because it goes now to the root of where many more people are starting to understand that racism and intolerance and discrimination is literally a threat. It's a life and death threat. It's a threat to many of us who have seen our loved ones perish over generations, and there wasn't a lot of outcry from the white mainstream community about it. But now I think more white folks especially, are starting to see the interconnectedness of everything. And they're starting to see that, wow, if we don't have decent working conditions, if we don't have proper healthcare, if we leave people in marginalized bubbles unattended, even as we demand their labor to do all sorts of essential tasks like grow our food and drive our transportation systems, then we're all going to be affected. Every single one of us is going to be affected. I think that's the big lesson that everybody's been talking about over these last months.
Absolutely. And it was really interesting so Harvard University this late last week, declared that there will be no more having the arts. So the arts program is going to be cut from Harvard University. It's not going to be, how we could study the art program as a major, it's not going to be minor. So your course is going to be elective. So a lot of people were saying, I want to know the arts because the arts give us critical thinking.
Yeah.
And I know you kind of briefly touch on it when you talk about, seeing for the first time as a child going to a funeral, right? How does your own experience shape your teaching?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I actually started off my term this year speaking to the students in slightly more of a personal way than I normally would, because I found that storytelling is really important, and connection, and letting students know that I'm a multidimensional person. I'm not just a flat screen, right? Just parroting certain words was important. But there was also there's a pedagogical, there's an educational component behind it, right? So I started off the term by telling my students that I was as much shaped by what I learned formally in school as what I did not learn formally in school and was forced to learn on my own or through my family or community outside of the halls of academia, right? I had to go off myself and look in the library for representation, because there was a time when I was just starved, right? I had my parents had put me, they're from Trinidad originally, and my mother, who loves languages, decided to put me in a French immersion school, which is great because now I'm bilingual. But on the other hand, I was the only Black student in my class for many, many years. And I never had a Black professor or teacher until I got into I think it was my second or third year of university. And while in university, I just had this hunger for where is Black intellectual thought? Where do I situate myself? Why am I not included in the curriculum? And that led me to to connect with other students in the Black Students Network. And we banded together because we realized that we had this common experience of this hunger and thirst and wondering why we were disappeared from the curriculum and from, formal higher education especially. And so we banded together to put pressure on the university to get more courses, to hire more Black professors. Sound familiar? But the thing is that
Yes.
one day I found this text of a book called Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, who was an unapologetic Black lesbian feminist poet, writer, thinker, brilliant philosopher, theorist, organizer, publisher, just an incredibly dynamic woman who made a huge impact in the feminist movement. And it was through reading her text that I really began to sort of understand myself better. And it was the book that I used to come out to my mother, actually. But I went into, and I was studying philosophy of all things. I was the only Black person in my program for 4 years. The only Black person as a student or as
Wow.
any faculty. Everyone else around me, there was like maybe one or two Asian people, but that's it. So that was a very lonely experience. But I took this one course called Philosophy of Feminism. And I thought in that course, finally I will be represented. I went into the course and we were reading, week after week after week. My professor, who I really respected because she was so knowledgeable and she was such a good teacher, didn't have any texts about Black women or Asian women for that, or South Asian women, or Indigenous women for that matter, in a course called Philosophy of Feminism. Yeah, so I confronted her and I said, I brought my Audre Lorde book because I realized on my own that Audre Lorde was famous. She was internationally known. I said, why don't we have an author like this person? And the professor answered, oh, well, we already have too many, I've been told we have too many readings, so we can't cover it all. And that was her response. So I kept at her. And in the last course, in the last a week of the lecture, she said, I'm going, as a response to a student, I'm going to talk about inclusion and diversity. And she drew a square on the blackboard And she said, there are certain people who are marginalized, and she drew lines outside of this square. And when you're marginalized, it can be helpful actually, because you can see into the center, you can see how the system works, and that can give you a different perspective. And then she said a few other words, and she ended her, that was the class on diversity. And I remember being so furious about that. I went off, I founded a group with a bunch of other women to push on these issues even more. And the next year, that same professor who was so reluctant
Yes.
and defiant changed her course. She changed her course and she started teaching bell hooks. She started teaching Audre Lorde. She started teaching about Sojourner Truth and the famous speech, Ain't I a Woman, which was a speech
Yes.
even back in the 1800s, which was maybe even the precursor to what we now all parrot as intersectionality, right? There were women way back, over 150 years ago who were talking about class, race, and gender all together. Black women, right, who were theorizing the need to deconstruct all of these things and to see the interconnectedness of oppression, right? She began teaching all of this. And I know that because I snuck into one of her courses to just see what was going on. And then I realized, as students, we have a power.
Absolutely.
As students who speak up, we have a power to actually bring to bear that we have something crucial and important to bring in our epistemology, meaning our ways of knowing, ways of understanding, right? That we contribute to a rich culture of intellectualism and creativity when it comes to pushing the agenda, and that we have a political presence. And that's what I want students in my courses to really understand. I think it's crucial for them to understand this, not from just a point of view of like, oh, we want diversity because we want more color, a Black one, a white one, a queer one. I want them to understand these things because this is not just a matter of diversity for diversity's sake, but it's a matter of understanding that all of these different components and getting to see things in a complex manner and understanding how important coalition building is, how important it is to be able to listen carefully to what somebody else is saying, to be able to see things from a different standpoint, right, is part of our very survival. Being observant, right, being able to understand and maneuver in difficult and complex situations. It enhances our critical thinking powers. It strengthens us, in fact, to be able to know how to draw on the multiplicity of the ancestral knowledge, of the global knowledge of humanity. And that, to me, when we use the word university, it means universe, right? The universe is contained in that word. So that means that we must bring to bear different ways of knowing, different experiences. All of these are things to learn from, and that we cannot really be truly edified and be truly educated in a monoculture. We have nature to look around us to see. Nothing survives in a monoculture. Monoculture is death. Nature itself is diversity, is heterogeneity, is, complexity, it's difference coming together in harmony. And students, I think it's so important for them to take away this multiplicity of different experiences or knowledges from these different speakers and from somebody like me, because think about what they're going into. They're going into journalism, they're going into social work, they're going into healthcare, they're going into creativity, as you just said, right? They're going into professional communications, documentary making, whatever, so many different disciplines, business. there is no discipline that is taught at any university that cannot benefit from a multiplicity of ways of knowing and hearing from different kinds of people. And so, to me, when students come away from the hearing a speaker or hearing from somebody like me, and I ask the students to do reflections, because I want them to draw also on their own experiences and integrate their own experiences, because my philosophy of teaching is that I step into the classroom as one teacher amongst many teachers. I learn from my students as well. And I learn when I read their reflections and they draw connections between things like their own workplace harassment experience and listening to somebody like Winnie Ing, who used her difficulties as a worker to propel her into a glorious 30-year, 40-year career as a labor organizer, right? It's inspiring to people, right? And so I think I'm going on a tangent here. I'm kidding, but to me, it's just so important that people understand that, yes, you have to be a voter. Yes, you have to pay attention, especially at these times right now when we are so reliant on government to deliver certain programs, to protect us in this pandemic and so on, right? Yes, you must be engaged in that way. But your activity, your presence as somebody who is a resident, whether or not you're a citizen, maybe you're a visitor, maybe you don't have status, but your presence as a human being in this part of the world or any part of the world, you have something that you can tap into to make a difference.
I
When
totally,
people see all of these different people, Judy Rebick, Pascal de
yes.
Verlis, Winnie Ing, all of these different people come in and they see, oh, this person started off just like me, just asking questions. Why is that? Why am
Mhm.
I getting paid less? Or other basic questions like that. And it propels them into action and also fun, sometimes joy. People see joy, people see community, people see lifelong friendships that come out of this kind of work, right? People see a pride of things that they've been able to accomplish, a better life that has been achieved for so many different people, right? When they see these kinds of things, this is something that energizes people.
So, wh- so there's a lot to touch on, but there's two things that come to mind. In the philosophy class, up to now, my girlfriend, who is an admin at Rice, and she said, I have been here now for the last 5 years, and this is the first time I'm seeing this is my fifth year now, and we only still have one Black student in the program. So that she still can't get up. And she said, and every time I interact with the few racialized students, I know the name. And they said to me, oh, you're so good at names. And she said, no, because I could identify them.
Because you're the one Black person.
Because there's one Black person,
Yeah.
one Asian
Yeah.
person, right?
Yeah.
And she said, so I know them. I know them on my hand. When you talk about relying on government, next thing when you talk about relying on government during a pandemic, what are the challenges now you're seeing for your students in the classroom and out of the classroom during this really difficult times? Because I know for our students as CESAR, lots of them are losing their job. So
Yep.
who was already in precarious work is losing their job, and also losing parent. Like we just had one request for a grant, for emergency grant, and he just lost his father to COVID. So could you just touch on what you see?
Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing those stories too. It has been an incredibly challenging time for students. I've heard some of the same stories of some students are still working, and even those who are still working, it's challenging because you're not entering the workplace in the same way, right? You're having to go through all of these protocols, and a lot of workers are not feeling appreciated, in fact, for what they do. There was a lot of sort of championing of, oh, heroes and essential workers. That has just kind of vanished. as we get deeper and as this whole crisis prolongs itself, right? But I've been hearing about students who have lost their jobs as well. And naturally that has affected, right, people's ability to be fully present and engaged in completing their work. And I see this affecting students' mental health. Um, they have talked about the challenges, right, of going from class to class to class and trying to learn everything online. They've talked about some of the challenges of asynchronous learning, learning from just pre-recorded lectures, right, with no ability to engage, right, no ability to even get a sense of community and be able to bounce off of, one of the things that people enjoyed about the fact that we had our class every week live is that they got to hear from some of the other students, and sometimes that, hearing a question from a classmate sometimes provoked a thought or a comment or another question, right, and enriched the dialogue and exchange, which you cannot always get if you just have to, type an email question just to your professor and that's the end of it. So a lack of a sense of connectedness sometimes, right? I've been hearing about students saying that they feel like they're being asked to do more work, even though many educators got the directive towards the beginning of the pandemic that we needed to modify our course curriculum. We needed to make sure that we weren't overloading the students and to really be present to the fact that this is a different time. Don't just teach your same curricula and in the same way with this, some students have said that they don't find that the adaptation has been smooth because sometimes it's been replaced by actually asking the students to do more work, be present at lecture or listen to all of the lectures, read everything on the screen, and then contribute on discussion boards afterwards, or do all kinds of other things that, so there's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of exhaustion, but there's also a lot of need for us to be, I think, as educators and as a university, to understand that we need to be more flexible ourselves, especially, I think, when it comes to things like deadlines. And that's something that I just wanted to pause on for a moment, because it's the one area where I find that students become most stressed is around, of course, there's the daily kind of juggling of family, work or lack of work, lack of income, income insecurity or food insecurity. There's that to juggle with all of your classes, right? But then when you add on the pressure of now in the midst of all of these stressors, you still have to do your best. You still have to write an excellent paper. You still have to, even though you don't have the same resources to turn to, the deadline becomes a major stressor. And the things that I hear from students kind of, it's kind of sad actually, because I've had students, and I've been very flexible, I think, when it comes to these deadlines. I give them as a guideline, but then understand that, we have to work with whatever the realities are that anybody's confronting, right? But I have had students, even over the years, even before the pandemic, who've come to me and they say things like, "Oh, Professor, I'm ashamed to ask you this, but can I have more time?" Or, "I feel really bad that I have to ask you this, but I haven't been able to get to the whatever the assignment is." So they're using words like feeling bad, ashamed, they know that they're wrong, and all of these kinds of things, simply for asking for more time to complete a task. I've had students who even dropped out of the course without speaking to me before, because it's been so ingrained in them that you must follow the rules or be penalized. And when they felt that things were becoming intense, they just quit. And this has happened a couple of times. Like this is, I'm talking about since 2017, right? Where I'll see a student and I'll, hey. And I think it's remarkable because I make it a point to say very often, very frequently, if you're having difficulties, speak to me. If you're having any problems, any challenges, reach out and speak to me. But it is so ingrained in students not to ask for help, just follow that, meet the deadline or face the penalty, or just get a bad mark. And I think we have to change that culture because it is really hurting students. The other thing I want to say is about students with accommodations who have a plan, a letter where it's already built in that they get an extra 50% of time or whatever extra amount of time or resources that they need. Even these students come to me with stories, and I've had students come to me in tears telling me stories of professors who did not believe that they needed more time, even though they had accommodations. I had one student tell me, and she has an invisible disability, and she made an extra effort to attend class because she wanted to do postgraduate studies, right? So she even sometimes at the detriment of how she was feeling internally, she made an extra effort to show up in class, only to be told by a professor, well, you're always in class. You don't need more time. There's nothing wrong with you. Several students have told me that they have been shamed and felt unsafe and even harassed or been made to feel bad because they needed accommodations. And those are the ones, mind you, where it's officially recognized. Even this term, I've had a student who told me, I'm the first professor who hasn't made her feel bad about the fact that she needs certain accommodations. So I think this is a culture that we really need to change.
We have to, so you touched on some things that I want to kind of talk about. The isolation of synchronized class without a professor is so isolating. Words cannot tell you. The other thing, and this is a common, especially for students that have to go through so much to get into the classroom, overcome so many challenges, poverty, food, everything, and then to come into this space where you have no guidance. You just have to be talking to the screen, posting up your work. That's really hard. The other thing is, since in high school and going right back to junior school, don't prepare you to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
So self-advocacy is not part on it. It's something that comes with time. When you're beaten up so much, you have to push back and say, I have had enough. Yeah. So it comes by true lived experience, which is not supposed to be like that. Right. It should really start from in junior school to let students start to advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
And when you talk about accommodation in that way, I've seen it. So my son taking 8 courses. 8 courses this semester, 8 courses. I must have done exceptionally well and have completed it successfully. But he also had needed accommodation. Not that he didn't, if he don't want it, he wouldn't take it, but he needs accommodation.
Yeah.
And the teacher said to him, why should I give you accommodation when you're bringing in them kind of grades? Totally ignore his medical note. And we took the time and it was an interview. And my husband and I, we sat down. I mean, we talked with the guidance counselor, and she reassured us, this is hundreds of dollars into post-secondary. You really want the best vacants to continue on. And to hear the professor say that, and I said to him, you need to advocate.
Yeah.
We will sit with you, but you need to advocate on yourself, because you will continue to get bullies all the way, even in your workplace, that they don't agree with you. They're going to come after you. So let's start practicing this thing from now.
Absolutely.
And so know, and sometimes we as community leaders and even for students, we have a way, we also, and thank you for doing this, by empowering the student to say, you know, you don't have to say, I'm sorry, poor me, but just say, this is what I want, thank you, let's move on. Because we have to advocate
It
for
is so
ourselves.
true. And I like to draw my students' attention to what it is that they're studying in my course too. Because like I teach a human rights course, and then I also teach the social movements course. And I say, you're studying about people who have advocated for themselves. I want you to integrate that into your own life. And that's why I ask students to do reflexive thinking, reflective thinking on their own experiences and stuff like that. Because I say to them, just exactly what you said, advocate. And several times I've had to write back to students and say, you should not feel ashamed for asking for what it is that you need. So that's one thing that we need to inculcate in the students is self-advocacy and trust yourself, trust what you need, and the ability to speak up has to be encouraged, right? But I also want to say to educators, trust students. Trust them when they say, if I just have a little bit more time, I can get this done. Trust that they're not trying to just be lazy or slack off or, pull one over on you or anything like that. In fact, one student with a disability who I was having a chat with about this, she said, I wish that professors would think about how it's more work for me to have to go to the accommodation center, tell them all of this stuff, give them my medicals, everything, and jump through all of these hoops. Why would I choose to do that?
Yes.
It's actually more work. So when I say I need something, just trust and have. There's always going to be a few students who are, not doing their work or whatever, but that is not the majority of students. And the other thing I want to say to educators too, which I think we should all think about, is that when I've had students in my class who needed accommodations, it's actually made me more creative and it's made me better as a teacher. Like two examples I can think of, like one is I had a student who wasn't able to attend the course for like the last almost third to half of the course. She wasn't able to come to the class because she was too ill. So she wasn't able to do all of the written work. So we thought about it and I said to her, you know what, let's have you do an oral examination. So she ended up doing an oral examination and I learned more from that student through the oral examination than I ever would have learned if she had written me a paper, because we were able to have a conversation and I was able to ask her follow-up questions and she was able to draw on her personal experience. She wove in disability to a really great conversation about human rights and what she had learned in the course and what she was able to study. She deepened the conversation and both of us ended up getting way more out of it than if she had written the same answers to the same questions that everybody else got to do. Right? Another thing is that I had a student once who had low vision. So he was able to come to the course, but he needed the PowerPoint and he needed every single one of those images to be captioned. And I use a large, slide decks for my PowerPoints and stuff like that. And I thought, wow. But when I sat down to caption every one of these images, it didn't take me that as long as I thought. And it actually gave me more time to think about every single one of those images. And it made me more precise about where the image was taken, when it was taken. And it allowed me to think through how this particular incident, which I could just, quickly on the surface see was connected to what we were saying. But those small details actually enriched my delivery of the course. So I think that we need to stop seeing disability as always limitation or imposition, or somebody trying to, or if somebody says that they have a mental health issue, to think, oh, they're probably just trying to pull one off, pull one over on me as an educator. We need to get away from that and start to see that, again, not only is it that we need a diversity of different people coming into the classroom to teach from their lived experience that nobody else could, that even a textbook can't give you, but we also need to see different ways of learning can enrich the classroom too.
I like how, and it's so true. I like how you said, I come in as a teacher, but I have learned because there's many teachers within this space. And I find myself too, when I am talking to anybody, especially students, I always ask myself what they come into the conversation, what happened to them before they arrive in front of my face. So when I enter a space, I'm always thinking, what happened to that person an hour before they come? Because that will have an influence on the conversation that I take, right? So during this time, as we go through this pandemic, as we see people losing jobs, how could we fight against poverty? Because poverty, yes. And how could we organize around poverty? Because there's so many different layers and sections towards this poverty. Yeah. How do you
I think there's
yeah.
a lot of different ways to answer that. One of the things is that I think that we have to first start off by acknowledging that there are a lot of people who've been working on the issue for decades, for generations. We always have to center the people who are most directly impacted by the issue. And so we have to start off by acknowledging the leadership of people who have been mobilizing on these issues. And I'm thinking of, there's a multiplicity of different groups out there that have been around for a long time before this pandemic. Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, Low Income Families Together, these are some, Jane Finch Community Action Against Poverty. Those are just some of the names that come to my mind, right? Who have been out there and who've accomplished a lot, right? And who have deep ties and so on. But one of the things that is both heartbreaking to see the conditions, right, that people are living in, but it's also somewhat heartening to see how people have rallied as well during this pandemic to the mutual aid networks, what we call caremongering now. And to see new groups pop up. I'm thinking of groups like People's Defense. They're a group of tenants who look out for each other, right? They're starting to talk to each other in their buildings because they're seeing how a lot of predatory landlords who want to make a quick buck off of the real estate market want to push a bunch of tenants out of their units, right? And they're standing up and they're pushing back on that. We can see all of this happening on social media, right? Sometimes they're filming the way that they're actually rallying to support and stop evictions. We see the people who are rallying in the encampment support network, right? For those people who are building tiny shelters and trying to give immediate life-saving kinds of resources and energy and defense and support of those people. So we can get in, we need to recognize the leadership, I would say. We need to take inspiration from the communities that are self-organizing now to defend each other. We need to provide any kind of uplifting of their voices, any kind of resources that we may be able to provide. We can involve ourselves in these mutual aid networks that have cropped up. And I know CESAR has put some of these resources on your website. I have some of them on mine as well. But as much as we can do individually, we know that this is a systemic issue. We know that it's a systemic issue that's layered with factors of colonization, systemic racism, homophobia and transphobia, and of course, race, just racism and sexism. And the people who are most hurting, I think everybody is aware of this now, that the people who are most hurting during this pandemic are those people who have been historically marginalized and left out of economic prosperity in a deliberate way, right? So I think we can do a job as educators, as people in a educational setting, to kind of show how our government has treated people, such as migrant workers, migrant farm workers, live-in caregivers, domestic workers, all of these people, people doing the long-term care in all of those homes that are looking after the elderly in our communities. We can look at that and share that information. Then we can take a next step, which is to actually mobilize to put pressure on the government to change those policies. And people are coming forward and doing that now. They're getting involved in the fight for workers for paid sick days. They're connecting to organizations like Workers Action Center. Healthcare people in the healthcare sector are speaking up. They're telling their stories on social media. They are trying to lobby the government. They are speaking to the mainstream media. And the government is feeling it. They're still dragging their heels, right? But they are going to be forced to respond. They've had to back down on some of the regressive things that they've done. Although I fear that some of the statements that they've made have emboldened the police in particular even more to go on and intensify the racial profiling that has existed before the pandemic, right? But there's a number of different things that we can do, but we also have to, I really believe this strongly, is that we have to see this in a historical context that is a continuation of systemic racism and colonization. And we must support Indigenous nations that are trying to defend their lands and their economic rights and interests. So I think it's important for us to do solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people who are saying no to pipelines going through their territories and trying to steal their lands upon which they survive, right? And depend on. We have to support the Mi'kmaq fishers, right? Who have a ancestral and even recognized by the Canadian state right to fish for subsistence, right? And for economic benefit to feed their families, right? And so we must make these kinds of connections, but I think it's going to be really, really important for people to tune in and be very, very aware of what different political parties are saying, and to get to know who is your council person, who is your MPP, who is your member of parliament federally, and to begin calling those people, pushing them, the petitions, the phone zaps, all of this. They need to hear from us loudly and clearly, but we don't have to duplicate any campaigns because there's a lot of organizations on the ground already doing that work. We just need to move in coalition with them. The other thing that we can do, I believe, is that we can start to look at our own small circles or workplaces, anywhere where we may already have influence, and ask ourselves, what are we as a group doing together? There are certain people who are coming out. I think of the basketball players, even after they got so sick and tired of seeing Black people being shot by the police. And they said, you know what, we are going to use the lever of our labor. We're not going to just continue. We're going to go on a 2-day walkout.
Yeah, I saw that. Yes.
Inspired the scholars, and we did the scholars strike that spread across all North America. 2 days off. Let's just stop everything and think about what is this world that we're engaged in?
So
what are we doing here?
And and that really brings me to something. So my mentor, who has been a labor organizer for years and years, told me in 1972, every Black worker in Ontario went on a strike
Mhm.
and shut down the whole province.
Mhm.
She said, I was a young organizer at the time. I was coming up in the union, and, we came together, 8 women from different sectors.
Yep.
And then we mobilized and we put it out and we marched and we shut the province down. She said, I am really surprised that when we make small wins,
Yeah.
we get so complacent that we forget that it's a community that we have to bring on. She said,
Mhm.
at that time, that changed the way in which the legal center came about. It changed the human rights policies. So many wins for everybody. She said, that is how we have to do it. And when I think about now, as we don't have, I'm in conversation with some of these students because our food bank is closed. All
Mhm.
the racialized centers on campus is closed. How is these students getting the support they need? So right now I'm in conversation with them because we gotta find a way to reach the students because the sub run out.
Yeah.
It's gone. Um, yes, and they have to take on more and more loans and courses they don't want to. So they're keeping on this debt
Yeah.
just to keep to pay the rent. So when this is all over, they are steep in debt
Right.
more so than anything else. So it's really about the poverty. It just heaping on marginalized students. But we just gotta find a way to push back and fight. And I like how you said that we have to look within, don't reinvent the wheel. There's already having grassroots movement, get involved. Let's see how we can move this.
In my social movements and politics course, students got a chance to see how people who weren't even recognized as human sometimes, right? Not even, didn't even have the right to vote. Um, People who we would look upon as utterly powerless, supposedly, right? Were able to kind of assess the situation by engaging in consciousness raising sort of dialogues and examining and analyzing the environment around them, and then how they participate in the environment, and kind of do like a sort of a mapping of where does our power lie, because no one is truly entirely powerless. No group of people is ever truly entirely powerless, right? You may have the one person who could be isolated and knocked off, right? So when we start to see that, oh, okay, we're already a community. Like as students, we're a natural community. As a student union, we're a natural interest group, if you will, right? We have power collectively. And so I think, there's not only just, the workers' strike that I alluded to there before, but student strike also, right? Students can walk out. And we saw how effective that was when this government wanted to strip away the sexual health education. You had high school students who can't even vote yet, right? Walk out in droves, right? Band together with some parents who are also concerned, and the government had to back down on that and leave that alone. And so they were able to preserve a vitally important um, piece of our educational system that must be there, while also educating everybody else around and raising the collective awareness of people who weren't even directly affected by the issue, right? So I think this is really a ripe moment now for us to have broader conversations with other people and work in coalitions. When I see people like, we have these groups springing up now, like health providers against poverty, or doctors for defunding the police, or scholars who are taking on the issue of anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, right? The potential for coalitional work and consciousness raising and having broad conversations where more people can start to connect the dots because they're seeing so much shift and they're seeing how this pandemic is revealing the weaknesses and the structures and the inequality all around us, right? This is a really important moment that I think that we can do something about. We don't have to just, lie back and take it. And in fact, we need to tap into our anger and, dare I say, even our exhaustion. People in the civil rights movement, they were exhausted. Can you imagine going out and every single day, you can't even get on a bus, you can't even, sit and have a cup of tea without being harassed. That was the level of, pervasive disrespect that people were dealing. And people were actually, they just said, you know what? We've had enough. We have had enough. So we need to tap into that and draw inspiration from, when I get down, when I feel really low, it's knowing these stories. It's knowing these stories of people who went before us and sometimes often faced much harsher conditions than even what we're dealing with in this pandemic. And they persevered. They persevered, they kept on, they did not lose their sense of moral righteousness or their sense of entitlement to a better life. And that's what I draw on, that's what I turn to. And then I think about the small and larger ways that I can make a contribution.
Well, that lead me, and absolutely, we have to draw on so many, we have to look for strength, right? I tend to, make phone calls, or like this morning, I was still feeling down for this whole week, just in a really, really, really saddened state. And it was productive and progressive. I see the wins, but I still couldn't get myself. So I said, okay, I'm gonna sit into this really low feeling, this sadness, this depression. So I had enough, and I get these texts, how are you doing? So I sent it out this morning. I said, look, I'm not really feeling too good. I had a friend that I haven't even seen from since the beginning of the pandemic, and he drove from Ajax to come to my house to do a social distancing in his car to say, I just want to tell you face to face, you'll be okay. I'm sorry to hear what you're going through. So sometimes we have to call on our friends. We have to say, this is how we feel, in order to get that kind of that lift that we need to just get us to that, just that over that. Because now I felt and he went back, he just stayed he was going for his needle. He said, I just want to stop off, I had to make this trip down, and he left. But I felt I have been seen. My feeling have been recognized. And I really want to move into this conversation, as you say, to close it off. When you talk about how do you see racial justice in Canada as it stands today? Because, this is a tie into everything that you teach in a class and you put in. Where do you see it, where it is today at this moment? This junction with all the pandemic and everything that is going on.
Yeah, thank you. Before I answer that question, I just want to touch on what you said there, which I think we shouldn't just skip over, which is being in touch with our emotions. Emotions are intelligence, a form of intelligence, right? They are telling us something. And I go back to the brilliant Audre Lorde, that collection of essays. I really recommend anybody read that book, Sister Outsider, right? Who tells us that we need to tap into things like anger, You know, we need to tap into things like our sadness and stuff like that. It tells us that something's off, something is not right. We don't, we, you know, this is, we also live in a culture that also wants to just, you know, for you to be upbeat, you're supposed to put on the social mask. And when somebody asks you how you are, the only correct answer is, I'm fine, right? Somebody asked me in another interview, how do you stay positive? And I say, I don't stay positive. Sometimes I'm angry. Sometimes I am deeply saddened by the state of the world. And how could you not be? How could you not be when you see, we can see with our own eyes police officers killing us? How can we not be saddened when we see our fellow brothers and sisters living in parks, not being given proper? How can we not be saddened when we see an Indigenous woman in her last moments of life calling out from her hospital bed that she is being discriminated against and not getting the proper care? How can we not be saddened when doctors are forced into the streets in front of the city hall protesting? It's a pandemic. They should be in a hospital or resting, and they're forced into the streets begging for this government to listen and do the things that they say are urgently needed, roll out the vaccines to the areas that need it, get the paid sick days and stuff like that. So we have to be angry sometimes. Sometimes we have to be sad. That connects us to our humanity. So I just wanted to say that before, just kind of like,
Thank you.
we're
Thank
so
you.
her, she just breathes
Yeah.
along and blah, blah, blah. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
tap
sat with
back
it.
into the
Mm-hmm.
fact that, yes, a lot of
Yeah.
people are stressed. Yes, we're having mental health problems. Yes, there are students who can't finish their assignment on time. And we need to acknowledge reality. Stop ignoring reality. You know, you talked about poverty earlier, and this is also a ripe moment for us to talk about the fact that Canada is a country with different classes of people. That's another myth, that we think everybody's middle class, everybody's getting along. When we're in my class, I'm talking to Terry Montour. Six Nations is an hour and a half away. And she's telling us she doesn't have clean water easily available on her territory. You know, at one point the internet was flickering, and she said, oh, I'm sorry, you know, we don't have strong internet signals and easy access to the digital world sometimes in our nations, right? And that really brought it home and made it real to people, to the students in the class, right? This is not some abstract thing that you just quickly see on the news or whatever, or it's in some government report. This is Terry Montour. She's talking to us. She doesn't have clean water. She doesn't have consistent access to a stable, you know, like high-speed internet, right? And so rolling into the discussion about what is going on with racial justice in Canada now, the veil is dropping. People are starting to understand now that systemic racism exists. Many of us knew this, of course, for forever, right? But people are more people are starting to understand that, yes, people are being killed by police here. And those people are Black and Brown and Indigenous people. Those people are people with mental health conditions. You know, they're starting to understand that, yes, when a pandemic comes and we have, you know, racist rhetoric that is being spewed by people at the highest levels, that Asian people are going to be demonized, that Asian people are being attacked in the streets right now just because of where they come from, where their ancestors come from, how they look like. So we can no longer walk around in this fantasy of Canada, the multicultural land of peace. So that's, I mean, it's not positive, it's not a great reason, but now it's very difficult for people to say that systemic racism does not exist in this country. Doctors are saying it. White privileged doctors are saying that the people who are coming into their ICUs One doctor said this, actually, Dr. Callie Barrett, I believe her name is. She said she has not treated one white person in her ICU. All of the people are racialized people. Why? Because all of those people are still going out to work. They're the people in the grocery stores. They're the people who are, in the transportation, shipping all of these goods to us, right? They're the people in the factories who have never been able to stay at home. They're the people who wake up at 4 a.m. and get on that bus because they can't afford not to, because they had to feed their families, right? So these stories are starting to penetrate now. Now what we need to do is we need to deepen the conversation by saying, what are the policies, the laws, the condition, the government actions that are taking place that are perpetuating these problems? So I see two things. Other people have said to me, are things getting better or are they getting worse? And I say, yes. They're worse in terms of the crisis is deepening, and we know that it is racialized people who are dying first and foremost, right? But in another way, with the other pandemic, which is the pandemic of systemic racism and state violence, we are seeing unprecedented and historic levels of activity, engagement, awareness, consciousness raising. Like when I talked at the beginning of our interview about how when I was a little girl, I saw Albert Johnson's situation and how he was killed in his home. At that time, the Black community was much smaller, and there were very few people who were raising their voices to say there's something wrong with the police. And now today, there's a proliferation of different groups, like Not Another Black Life, showing up for racial justice, Doctors for Defunding the Police, Malton People's Movement, and of course, Black Lives Matter, which has become a global movement, right? And we've begun to shift. There's been a whole generational shift of people who are now seeing that when it comes to the prison industrial complex and policing, which are the most violent fist of the oppression that we face, it cannot be reformed. It's not a matter of more training. It's not a matter of giving them new toys to play with, body cameras or tasers or whatever. It's a matter of we need to move away from these oppressive structures that are grounded in an oppressive, colonial, and racist past, right? And they're saying, let's move the tremendous billions and billions of resources into creating healthy communities, into education, into housing, into programs, community services, opportunities for people. That is what will make us safe. So the thing that I'm most excited about coming out of this horrible time is that we now have a generational shift in understanding that that is the way to go. We have to make transformative change and pull ourselves away from economies of death and exploitation and disposability to economies of care and culture and support and solidarity and coalition and diversity. That's the only way we're going to survive all of this stuff. And so that's where the hope lies to me.
Thank you so much for this. I know we come to the end, but before we close off, there was this one of the Fox News anchor for years and years wouldn't talk about Black Lives Matters, wouldn't talk about this racialness. And he came at 78 years and he took up, he make a comparison between a gun and a taser.
Mm.
And he said, why would someone who in the force for so long don't know the difference between a taser and a gun? And it was reference to Dante Wright. And he turned and he said, we gotta stop making excuse.
Yeah.
And it just like blew up on the internet and tweet and everything,
I
because
know who you're talking about.
this was a shift of conscious.
Yeah.
This was a person, when you talk about generational shift,
Yeah.
that was a shift from saying, I don't believe this wrong. I'm so white. I'm so into my privilege, for him to say, we got to stop this.
Yeah.
We got to stop this. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for a rich conversation. And there's so much takeaway from me that, to just sit, reflect, acknowledge, understand that this is my stress, this is my depression, but also be very hopeful that, when we see people are really coming on and say this affects all of us.
Yeah.
It's very hopeful. So thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Carol, I want to thank you also. You have been a wonderful partner for all my time here as Unifor Chair. You and I have worked on a number of projects together, and you have helped me greatly in my work as well at Ryerson by being a connector. You're a community builder. You've helped me make connections with students, with other faculty and other departments, because you know everybody. And it's just been wonderful working with you. So I want to thank you. And I also want to thank all of the executive at CESAR, who we've worked well with over the years, executive director, presidents, and communications team, and everybody there at CESAR who helps make these programs happen, and who has been a strong and consistent progressive voice on campus on a whole range of different issues. So I really want to give a shout out to CESAR for all of the great work that you've done as well.
Yes, thank you. This couldn't be done without CESAR, and I am leaving my role, but the person stepping is very conscious. We have Maddie now is moving into as the president. We still have the executive director there. There's so many wonderful people to really keep CESAR consistent.
Yes.
And doing the right thing, and that is I'm really hopeful, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you so much. Thank you for CESAR. Thank you for everyone on the chat, and everyone have stay well, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.